there's no proof of the resurrection. How can you believe that? Which is central to Christianity. Paul says, if there is no resurrection, we're of all people to be pitied the most. What would be your quick, here's the proof of the resurrection, what would you point to?
Yes, it's one of those things I think as Christians, and regarding resources, Gary Habermas, I believe is his name, he's a professor at Liberty University, and Michael Licona, I think they've done really good work historically. Licona has a colossal work, like 800 pages, on the resurrection of Jesus, and what he seeks to argue from is, I think it's called the minimal facts argument. Okay. And what the minimal facts are things that they've gone through like journal after journal, like scholarly sort of stuff, and what they've looked at is right now consensus sort of scholarship. What are the minimal facts that like 90% of all, even secular scholars, adamant anti-Christians, like a Bart Ehrman, Dominic Crossan, and what's that other guy's name? Can't remember the other guy's name, but they, what are even these people saying happened? And so what they would agree happened, there was a man, Jesus of Nazareth, that existed in the first century. There was a man, Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, and even like Dominic Crossan says something like, it's one of the most well-attested facts of the ancient world that Jesus was crucified. Yeah. So contra Islam, everything says, nope, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. But Islam's clever remark is, it just looked like him. So God deceived everybody. So that's kind of an easy out. Yeah. But so the ancient world. So those are two minimal facts, and then there are two other minimal facts that we can agree with. So we don't agree with so that's where we would agree with them. We stop. But then we would also agree with them that a group of Jews began to run around and say they at least claimed they saw Jesus rise from the dead. And then a few years later, you have a guy named Paul who also now claims, I've seen the risen Christ. He was a persecutor of the church. He now became friends with him. So on four minimal facts, Jesus existed, Jesus was crucified, a group of Jews began to say, we saw him rise from the dead, and then another guy tags along, Paul, a few years later saying, I've seen him rise from the dead. And so if we go to reconstruct a crime scene in the first century, what's the most reasonable explanation that a group of Jews who believed in their law says, cursed is anyone who's hung upon a tree. So they're not sitting there going, oh yeah, Jesus is clearly the Messiah. We're looking, these are not the droids you're looking for. This is not the Messiah you're looking for. He was crucified at the hands of the people he was supposed to save you from, put him down, hung him on a cross, humiliated them, stripped them. And so from a minimal fact standpoint, how do we go about explaining why a group of men would begin to run around, claim that he rose from the dead, and then from there, a persecutor of the church would agree with them in the message and begin to claim that he rose from the dead. And if we seek, and again, here's a place where we need to play, we need to do both ends. We need the unbeliever to also describe, well, what's your theory of what happened? Because if they just want to say, oh, no, I don't accept it, like obviously there's a sense in which since we're doing it inductively, we can't prove to you that Christ rose from the dead. Or even if we could go back and we observed him rise from the dead, and you're a hardcore naturalist, you can say, oh, well, maybe something strange happened in this particular instance. But what we end up having is, as we try to reconstruct a scene, I would say the naturalistic explanations that Jesus didn't really die, that they stole the body, that they were hallucinating. The idea that 500 men would claim to be hallucinating, and then years later, Paul claimed to have the same hallucination, I think is a pretty far-fetched idea. Like one or two people, smoking some peyote in Colorado, that's one thing. But when you have 500 men, and then from there they begin to die, and I would say that's even a part of things of the evidence is like if they stole the body, why would they lie? You know what I mean? Like if you and I committed a crime together, or not even a crime, that even if I was to leave here today and someone was to ask me, were you with Ryan in there, and we're going to kill you if you say yes. I'm like, I didn't see Ryan. I'm going to lie to protect my life. I'm not going to die for a lie that isn't getting me anywhere. You know what I mean? For the first 3 centuries, Christianity didn't get you anywhere. Fed to lions, set on fire. So as we try to reconstruct the crime scene, so to speak, or we try to reconstruct what happened historically, given the minimal facts of Jesus existed, Jesus was crucified, a group of Jews claimed that he rose from the dead, and then from there you have even other things such as the embarrassment of all these people who kind of denied him. They're not heroes, you know what I mean? They denied him, and then from there they even rolled out their first witnesses were women, which were not like really accepted. Like, oh yeah, let's listen to a group of women. You know what I mean? They're hysterical women. We're not going to follow their testimony. And so what does the Bible roll out as the first witnesses of the resurrection? Women. So I think if you look at the first century, you look at a group of people trying to start a cult or start a new religion, I don't think it's through the power of the resurrection. I don't think it's through this resurrection narrative. And I think the things around it, such as the persecution that Peter and Paul, and even things like Peter, like we know that Paul, no one doubts Paul existed. We can go to Israel and go to Peter's house, for goodness sakes. You know what I mean? So here Peter is, people we know existed, claiming that he rose from the dead. Why are they doing it? I think the most reasonable explanation is they saw him rise from the dead. I think the naturalistic ways to try to set it aside, such as he body stolen, didn't really die. That stuff just doesn't really add up. He got punctured through the side with all the water coming out and stuff like that. So I just don't think that stuff adds up. So why do we believe in the resurrection? Well, I think it's the most reasonable historical explanation of what could have happened to Jesus of Nazareth. That I would even go further and say he predicted his own death, and in the prediction of his death also verifies who he was and everything else. And so far from not having any historical reason, but we need to be comfortable making the unbeliever, well, explain the crime scene. Because it's one thing just to play the skeptic, but like you and I have talked about, even on things like creation and science stuff like that, it's easy to just play, oh, well, I don't think that proves evolution. I don't think that proves, well, what's your explanation for these facts then? And that's one of the things we need to go back and forth with people on, is getting them to explain what it is they believe about these events. Because most of the times people just want to punt. And when you want to punt, then you don't have to say anything and show your hands. But the minute you want to play your cards, then you're suddenly having to make arguments and reconstruct. And we want to do both. And I would just say the evidence is on our side that what really happened, the most reasonable explanation of why a group of Jews would be fed to lions and set on fire, is because they actually saw Jesus Christ rise from the dead, and he was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and he was in their context of first century or Second Temple Judaism. He was in fact the Messiah, and he overturned, and they saw those and believed those things. So I think it's very reasonable to believe that stuff.